Chapter 20 February 17th, 1943, Lodz. My initial plan was for Esther and me to return to the train station to get out of Lodz as quickly as possible. But the dense clusters of Nazi soldiers at the station that next morning immediately shut down that plan. "Do you think they are looking for us?" Esther asked, as we watched from well over a block away. "It's possible, and certainly not worth the risk of finding out," though my fists were clenched in frustration, and the morning had only just begun. Warsaw was over 130 kilometers away, and if Esther was right in what she had told me, any day now the Nazis would return to that ghetto to finish what they'd failed to do a month ago. No, they would return to finish off the ghetto entirely. A liquidation. I couldn't be here unless creeping forward one footstep at a time along snow-covered German-monitored roads. I had hoped to get to Warsaw today by train to deliver Esther's package and offer the resistance any help they needed. We backed away from the train station because we had to, because it was only a matter of time before a soldier noticed us and compared us to the description of two girls who had entered the ghetto in the moonlight and vanished by dawn. "Now what?" Esther asked. "How long do you think it will take us to walk to Warsaw?" I mused. "We'll have to move at night and hope for places to hide during the day. How fast can you go?" Esther's eyes rolled upward while she did the calculations. "Realistically, it'll probably take us a week." I cursed under my breath. I knew Esther had heard it, and that she was probably shocked, but she could add that to the list of my personal failures. She probably didn't know the full extent of crimes I'd committed over the past years. Endless lies, bribes, thefts from Polish shops, or the occasional ambush of a Nazi soldier. I could spend hours describing my growing eagerness to repeat what we had done at the cafe, to take a bigger bite from the Nazi occupation. Passive resistance wasn't enough anymore. I wouldn't stop the ghetto liquidation, the deportation to death camps. It wouldn't stop the ghetto liquidations, the deportation to death camps. It wouldn't shut down the showers at Auschwitz that rained down poison and genocide. If I was going to make a difference, then I needed to fight. But instead, I was facing a week of walking and hiding and cursing the cold weather for its relentless chill, just as this war was relentless and death was relentless. Just as my frustration constantly gnawed at me like a slow-moving drill, burrowing deeper every day. In fact, the only thing that I was certain would end was the luck that had carried us through Lodz. I couldn't expect it to follow us all the way to Warsaw. I shouldn't even hope for it to last until curfew tonight. Half of our remaining day was taken up with buying better wintertime clothes for our journey, which we put into Esther's shoulder bag, except the bag must also hide the gun I stole, so I agreed to carry it. By the time we were finished, most of our money was gone, adding to my irritation. I had hoped to enter the Warsaw ghetto with supplies to help the resistance fighters. Our goal was to escape the city before curfew and then find a place to rest until it was quiet enough to walk through the night. And for the most part, we left Lodz with no one giving us a second glance. There seemed to be an assumption that every Jew was already hidden behind the walls, so we weren't worth a second look. For those who did look, I smiled back at them as if we were friends, and maybe at one time we might have been. Esther had been studying me all morning, though she hadn't said much. Finally, she asked, "How do you do it?" "Do what?" "Mix in with these people like you're Polish, and then with ours as a Jew. It's like you have two separate personalities." I'm only me. But I don't go about with my eyes on the ground, as if I'm ashamed, or as if I expect to be hurt. Why should I? I'm proud of who I am, what I am. But you wear a crucifix, she said softly. You lose the Jewish accent out here and present yourself as one of them. I sighed and looked away. Out here, I have to survive, and so do you. One day this war will end, and then I will walk these streets again as myself. Will you? Esther shrugged, her shoulders as rounded over as usual. I wonder if this will ever end. The war? The hatred. I remember my father saying he'd finally come to believe the war had moved past its hatred of Jews. And then this happened. Maybe when the world opens its eyes to what has been done to us, they will realize how destructive hate can be. Esther shrugged again. Maybe, but they'll never forget again. In time. But they'll forget again in time. And when they forget, they will all start once more. I put an arm around her and used it to straighten her posture. Enough of us must survive the war to tell our stories, and every story will matter. When they remember our stories, they will forget their hatred. She smiled and began walking taller. Thank you, Shaya. For what? For being patient with me and teaching me and for helping me get through this. I know I've made a lot of mistakes. I brushed that off like it was nothing, like it was what anyone else would have done. But that just bothered me more because I hadn't been at all patient with her, and I was teaching her only because her mistakes threatened my safety too. Worst of all was that despite my poor treatment, she'd been helping me far more than I'd helped her. For as little experience as she had, she was learning fast. Or did she truly have so little experience? Where were you before you joined Akiva? I asked. I joined Akiva when I was 12, just not your group in Krakow. Then where? Farther north. Considering that Krakow is in the southern part of Poland, nearly anywhere would be farther north. And maybe, around others, I had to let her get away with avoiding any talk about her past, but now it was only the two of us. I had the right to know who I'd been partners with, who I was trusting with my life. I had to be careful, though. I didn't want to ask her about her family, not yet, because chances were she didn't have a family anymore, just as it was possible that I didn't have a family anymore. Tell me about yourself, then. What were you like before the war? She considered that a moment, tilting her head as if deep in thought. This in itself was interesting. To answer, she had to compare herself to who she was now, how the war had changed her. I knew how I would answer such a question because I'd thought about it many times. I could answer it. I just didn't want to. I guess I was, before the war I was happy. The simplicity of her answer left me speechless. How often I once took that for granted, as if life would always be as innocent as it used to be. Esther broke the silence with a question of her own. Shaya, do you believe in God? I paused in my walk. What do you mean? Do I believe he exists? Of course. No. I mean, do you believe in God's word, his promises to our people? I knew where she was going with these questions, and I tried to find an excuse to change the subject, but the earnestness of her expression deserved an honest response. I believe in God's promise, I said, but I've run out of patience waiting for them. I believe in God's laws, but what about God's laws? What about God's law not to murder? Esther was ahead of me, but when she looked back, her face had become deadly pale. Suddenly I realized those questions weren't for me. She asked because she needed the answers for herself. Abraham and his friends believed that what we've done, what we're doing is murder. Are they right? I drew in a slow breath. Last fall, after I shot that soldier in the train yard, I was upset one night and Reuben found me. He believed that God has given us the right to defend ourselves. Were we defending ourselves the night we attacked that cafe? Because it seemed like we started that fight. And did any of it matter? We didn't stop the war or get the Nazis to leave Krakow. We can't even say that lives were saved because of what we did. Her voice rose in pitch. What about Lodz? All we did there was make things worse. I only wanted to get some answers, but instead we stole a weapon, lost food that could have saved lives, and ended up being the cause of an action. Maybe what we're doing is just as bad as the enemy. Stop it. It's a good thing we were outside of town because I heard myself yelling. Don't ever say that again. Don't ever think like that again. We are not like them. She instantly cowered. No, of course not. I didn't mean what happened in Lodz was murder. Every single shooting. The action might have started because they were looking for us. But I stopped there, the words choking my throat. Until this moment, I hadn't had to think too much about this, that the consequences of entering the ghetto weren't always good. But I'd never been part of anything that awful. The action started because they were looking for us. They were looking for us. This was never what I had joined the resistance to do. I became a courier to save lives, to offer help and a chance for survival. I was never supposed to be the reason people died. Chaya, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. No more talking. Tears welled up in my own eyes, but I didn't want them. I didn't want to think about Lodz anymore, about the people who were being buried today, including 3 brave teens I would have considered friends had they lived. Would it be the same story in Warsaw? Would it be the same story until the last of our people were gone? Off to the side of the road was a small woodshed. It had a narrow window facing the road that we could use to see out if necessary, and it was guarded by a blackthorn tree bare of leaves. I could see the thorns sticking out along every branch, hopefully a deterrent for anyone else approaching the woodshed. It should provide us a decent place to rest until dark, a safe place to cry away the memories of Lodz. Chapter 21, February 18th, 1943, Road near Brzezinski. I awoke with a start to the rattling sound of a car driving by. Morning light screamed in uneven streaks through the dirty windows, where patches of bright sunlight blended with splotches of shadows. Esther yawned beside me, but it took her a moment to realize the same thing that had me already shaking my head. We had overslept. This little shed must have been gathering heat all day, so when we climbed in here, feeling secure from being discovered, it had been too easy to nest ourselves on the round logs, curl up near each other and sleep, truly sleep. Maybe we needed it, but now we were facing a full day ahead in which walking was unsafe and hiding was unbearable. We'll just have to be careful, I told Esther. We're not staying here. But if we're seen, if we're questioned, who gave you this assignment to go to Warsaw? I asked. Antek did. I told you that already. And when did he explain that our safety was the top priority? That at all cost you were to protect yourself? Esther lowered her eyes. He never did. We're to get to Warsaw as quickly as possible. Then gather your things. Let's go. The problem was we had very few things, the exact opposite position I wanted to be in at this point in our journey. I had the stolen gun hidden in Esther's sack, but not a single bullet. Thanks to yesterday's purchases, we also had warmer coats, where our identification papers were now, but we hadn't had enough left to buy any food. Our last meal had been a full day ago, but I tried not to think of that. To avoid entanglement with the Nazis, we kept to the back roads, but they still showed tire tracks from cars and wagons and prints from horses and foot traffic.